Hello there, everyone, and welcome to On the Safe Side, a monthly podcast hosted by the editors of Safety and Health magazine, the official magazine of the National Safety Council. This is Alan Ferguson. I'm Associate Editor at Safety and Health magazine. With me is my fellow Associate Editor, Barry Bettino. Hello, Barry.
Hey, greetings, Alan.
Our fellow Associate Editor, Kevin Drewley, is away on assignment. Thank you so much for joining us for this May 2025 episode, number 63 in our history, and this month's episode is sponsored by Babbel for Business. Many of our listeners have had a unique journey into the safety profession. We'd like to hear more about it for the My Story feature in our magazine. Submit a personal story or encourage a safety colleague to do so by emailing us at safehealth@nsc.org. In this month's episode, we'll examine some highlights from the May issue of Safety and Health magazine. Lori Guasta, Senior Director of Consulting Operations at National Safety Council, will join us for our 5 Questions With segment to talk about continuous improvement, one of the weekly themes for National Safety Month, which is coming up in June. And we'll share some of the most impactful stories we have put together for Safety and Health in the In Case You Missed It segment. Is everybody ready? Let's go.
Along with May flowers, this month brings plenty of occupational safety and health news. The May issue of Safety and Health features a pair of stories about construction safety. Kevin examines the issue of suicide prevention. Construction, as we know, takes a physical toll on the body, and financial pressures and looming deadlines are often constant. All of these are among the key contributing factors to an alarming rate of suicide in the industry. The article discusses warning signs and risk factors that can increase the likelihood of suicide attempts and shares how experts are trying to reform mental health awareness in construction. And that often includes having blunt and open conversations with workers about how they're feeling. If you or someone in the industry that you know is struggling, there is help available. Calling 988 can connect a worker directly to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. As Kevin notes in his story, employee assistance programs, human resources departments, industry groups, and mental health professionals all can offer resources to help. So please take a few minutes this month to read this story, and we encourage you to share it with a colleague. It could make a difference in the life of that person or someone they know. One of my contributions this month is a look at construction falls by using numbers to tell the story. And what this article does is details some rather striking statistics on falls, which are the leading cause of fatalities in construction and the second leading cause of non-fatal injuries. This month's issue of Safety and Health also provides key tips on the proper use and storage of lithium-ion batteries from Alan, whose article also discusses how to make an emergency plan and what to do in case of a fire. There's plenty more in this issue, which will arrive in your mailbox, or you can read it online at safetyandhealthmagazine.com.
Are you aware that OSHA cites language barriers as a contributing factor in 25% of workplace incidents? The stakes are high. Safety mishaps harm employees, drain employer resources, and in the worst cases can be life-threatening. Bridge the communication gap with Babbel for Business. Babbel's digital language learning platform caters to teams with industry-specific content, equipping your employees with practical conversation skills for a safer workplace. Enhance safety, foster understanding. Discover how at babbelforbusiness.com. That's BABBEL for business.com. In June, the National Safety Council celebrates National Safety Month. Once again, the Council has divided the 4 weeks into important topics. We'll discuss 3 of those later, but joining us to talk about continuous improvement, the topic for NSM's first week, is friend of the podcast, Lori Guasta, NSC Senior Director of Consulting Operations. Lori, thank you so much for joining us here on the Safe Side.
Thanks, folks. Glad to be here.
How would you define continuous improvement, and what are the major benefits for worker health and safety?
Yeah, great question. Taking just a definitional look at continuous improvement, it's really a deliberate and ongoing effort to enhance processes, systems, outcomes, any parts of your system through either incremental or more broad breakthrough changes. Related specifically to workplace safety and health, it really involves this active seeking of ways to reduce risk. And so I want to emphasize that continuous improvement applied to health and safety is all about risk. And in fact, anything that we do in health and safety should have this risk-based approach. But seeking ways to reduce risk by improving practices and then also by fostering a culture within an organization that's focused on learning. A lot of us have heard of becoming a learning organization. I think Peter Senge published that, the Fifth Discipline book in the 90s. But that's really key to a culture that will allow for continuous improvement to succeed in an organization. It also requires this environment that is committed to accountability, to innovation, and to results. So driving improvement to see those enhancements is what continuous improvement is all about. In terms of the benefits for worker health and safety, there are plenty. Committing to continuous improvement within an organization can first and foremost help to identify and mitigate hazards earlier, often before an incident would ever occur. In that vein, we can see reductions in the potential for serious incidents and fatalities, SIF, which is a big focus of the National Safety Council's strategy this year and moving forward. This really, again, emphasizes that focus on high-risk activities and then other factors from a HOP lens, a human and organizational performance lens, that we know just amplify the risk. Promoting that proactive and learning culture that I mentioned is really key here as a benefit to worker health and safety when we commit to and drive continuous improvement. And this is where all employees from the frontline workforce to senior leadership feel empowered and engaged to raise concerns and suggest improvements. That's what continuous improvement's all about. Finally, driving operational excellence just overall. We know that safer workplaces tend to be more efficient and reliable. We see the improvements in quality, productivity, even profitability. So it makes sense from a people perspective and a broader organizational perspective.
Lori, are there common challenges to implementing continuous improvement, and how can those be addressed?
Yeah, absolutely. The concept of continuous improvement might seem simple, but the implementation or the execution can be quite challenging for companies. Some of the common barriers that we see first involve this resistance, this cultural resistance, if you will, or a change. People have to be convinced that a change is good. And from a leadership perspective, and I have a PhD in leadership, so I'm well versed in this subject, but nobody likes to feel that the organization is trying to change them. They're more receptive, however, when they're engaged to tackle a change that everybody's exposed to. So it's really about crafting that message to tackle that barrier of cultural resistance. Cultural resistance also takes shape in this mindset of we've always done it this way, or tradition rules, right? But this barrier, in my opinion, is lessening. As we know, nearly half of the current labor force in the United States are made up of folks under 40 years old, so millennials and Gen Zers. And so we typically attribute that mindset of we've always done it like this to maybe a baby boomer or a late Gen X generation in the workforce. And those populations in the workforce are shrinking right now, for better or for worse. I'm a jaded Xer, so I can attest to that a little bit, but that's one barrier. Another one has to do with, I think, the key driver for success in any continuous improvement effort, and that is leadership alignment. So if you have a lack of leadership alignment or unclear ownership for driving improvement efforts, good luck, right? Leaders, we know, set the tone for an organization. They're instrumental in defining expectations for folks across the entire organization and holding those folks accountable. And I'm talking middle managers, frontline supervisors. The last barrier I want to talk about has to do with insufficient data or feedback loops to inform decisions and measure progress that are connected directly to a continuous improvement effort or project. Addressing each of these barriers, again, seems simple, but it's a lot more challenging in the actual execution or implementation of a CI or continuous improvement project. So what can we do? How can we tackle these barriers? A first idea is this notion of psychological safety, creating a psychological safe environment where employees feel comfortable speaking up is really foundational to success here. It is about, creating that learning organization where folks feel engaged and they see the fruits of their labor, if you will. If they're going to say something, that leaders are responsive and they're listening and you're seeing action as a result. We do this as an organization by investing in capability and capacity building of our most precious resource, and that's our humans. Training teams in how to think differently, how to think from a systems perspective, how to do root cause analyses, how to apply effective management of change processes is really key here as well. Finally, I would say establishing these clear structures for reporting, for evaluating, where we can glean insights from different levels of the organization and then act on those. We really need to use risk-based data to inform the learning here. What does our near-miss reporting trends tell us? What are the perceptions around risk and safety from the front line, the boots on the ground perspective? And then most importantly, modeling from the top. That we're coming back to leadership. Like I mentioned, I would and probably will again. But when leaders consistently ask, how can we make things better here? That sets that right tone for learning across the organization. It helps to promote that learning culture and that essence of psychological safety.
What responsibilities do safety professionals have in the continuous improvement process?
The last time I was with you all, well, actually, it might have been 2 times ago, when we talked about fatigue as a shared responsibility. Same thing applies here. It's everyone's responsibility. Everyone in the organization plays a really pivotal role in driving continuous improvement, whether formally or informally. But safety professionals have a unique opportunity to, I'd say, accelerate the success of continuous improvement. First, they're the facilitators of learning. Safety professionals can help team members analyze incidents, near-miss trends, leading indicators, and the value of other data that we're working with in our organizations. They can champion systems thinking and this risk-based approach to ensure that our improvements are on target, right? That they are targeting root causes, not just symptoms or folks' feelings about things, that it's got some accountability track there. Safety pros connect people with processes. They're liaisons, right? They help align goals across the organization, across operations to maintenance, HR, IT, including various levels of leadership. Safety professionals can be change agents. In a lot of my leadership training, I talk about frontline leaders being the primary change agent in an organization. And I put safety professionals in that same category of possible change agents. They build trust. They show the value of collaboration, which again comes back to, fostering that learning organization, that positive safety culture that we want to see. Final point here, specifically related to their roles, safety professionals have a duty to constantly look for ways to reduce risk. The first question that we had chatted about, that is the point here. Applying continuous improvement to health and safety into the profession is about reducing risk. And the most effective way that I have witnessed this in action is through this partnership that happens with frontline leaders or safety professionals leading improvements at the front line, partnering with the folks that are exposed to the risk that can kill them or hurt them, and are mainly largely responsible for profit in the company. They're the folks doing the work. So partnering with them to ensure first a safe work environment, but then, listening to their suggestions and ideas for enhancement is really where the rubber meets the road, the bread meets the butter, whatever metaphor we want to use here. But safety professionals have a very pivotal role here in continuous improvement.
How does continuous improvement work for, let's say, organizations with 50 employees versus 500 or 5,000 employees?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, National Safety Council had just signed a strategic alliance or partnership with the Small Business Administration, I think, last year. And so this is really relevant. A lot of our members are small to medium-sized companies. And so we get asked this same question often. With regard to continuous improvement, the principles are the same, but the execution looks different, similar to the challenges question, right, that we discussed. A common framework that people use to guide any continuous improvement is Deming's plan, do, check, act cycle. It's actually described as a continuous improvement framework, so it makes sense, right? It's a great place to start. And it's pretty simple, right? It's simple, but incredibly useful to support what I had defined continuous improvement around this deliberate effort to enhance processes and outcomes. Plan, do, check, act cycle can help you do that. Now, in a 50-person organization, continuous improvement might look more informal. It's built into daily team huddles or toolbox talks or even one-on-one conversations. It's highly people-driven, right, with visibility and access to leadership across the organization. And I would even go so far to say this could expand all the way up to a 200-person organization. NSC, we're about 250, and I feel like we're small enough where we know each other, right? But the difference here is that the access to leadership is key. There's no place to hide. Everyone knows each other. A good idea is a good idea no matter who brought it to the table. And so that access to leadership is a lot easier in a smaller company. And we know that leaders set the tone and they drive the success of any initiative that we put forward. I'm going to go so far to say here, though, that continuous improvement may be a lighter lift and maybe even easier to drive in a smaller organization for some of those reasons. However, we see a lot of really sophisticated CI efforts going on in highly mature or large organizations. But here you see the execution looks much different. In the larger the organization is, the more formal structure and system you need to drive success around continuous improvement. You need a suggestion management tool, a place for folks to anonymously report great ideas if they're not psychologically safe to come to the table on their own. Or this tiered accountability factor where if a frontline employee brings a safety suggestion, the frontline leader or safety professional or middle manager is actually held accountable to, take that suggestion and then do something to act on it. And this is where we come into tracking preventative and corrective actions. Each of those come from, sadly, something bad that's happened, or in a learning way, a great idea or a creative solution or an innovative process suggestion that can drive these efforts forward. We know that with complexity, a clear strategy is required and will be needed in larger organizations to implement effective continuous improvement. And this has to do with even communication. Why are we trying this? It's not a new flavor of the month type of initiative. This is purposeful, it's deliberate to enhance, fill in the blank, whatever it is we're trying to enhance. Regardless of the size, I would say the key to continuous improvement is just keeping focused on the value. How does this improvement reduce risk, first and foremost, but also contribute to increasing trust and supporting people, especially the folks on the front line? And those are some of those cultural dimensions and, the characterization of an organization as a learning organization. This does come back to the importance of leadership. In my opinion, the primary duty of a leader is to understand the jobs of their direct reports and constantly seek ways to make their work easier and more enjoyable. Folks, enjoy coming to work. They work more productively and they work more safely. By focusing really both on the risk and the culture, I think continuous improvement efforts have a greater chance for success. So we can get the best out of people. We can realize the formal benefits to our business and our enhancing our work processes, which, is really a win-win-win situation.
Well, what resources would you recommend for listeners who want to learn more about continuous improvement?
First and foremost, the National Safety Council is doing some great things in this area. With the release of our new SIF model, we have some really great content on safety maturity and how to advance that within an organization, which would be, I'd say continuous improvement holistically. From a human and organizational performance perspective, there's some really great resources out of the HOP Lab by Southpac International Group. They're out of Australia, but some really great resources on operational learning and other ways to execute continuous improvement through HOP and integrating HOP elements and principles. Obviously, checking out the Deming cycle, the plan, do, check, act cycle is a really great place to start. But I had actually done a little bit of homework and kind of dusted off my bookshelf. And there are two books I'd like to recommend. First is The Toyota Way by Jeffrey Liker. This provides a really great foundation for understanding lean and continuous improvement cultures, bringing the best of both of those risk reduction efforts and culture together. And then there's a book by Trevor Klentz, Kletz, and that's called Learning from Accidents. And it's a really great read on systemic learning and risk reduction. Again, that emphasis on risk reduction and culture is really key here. In terms of podcasts, hello, you're right here, right now, on the safe side, NSC's Primetime Podcast. And then Todd Conklin, who's a HOP scholar, well-known, he's got a podcast called Pre-Accident Investigation Podcast, is really good. And then the last one I'd recommend is The Safety of Work. That's a podcast you can find online too.
Well, Lori, thank you so much once again for joining us here on the Safe Side. We appreciate it.
Thanks. It's always great to be with you guys.
For week 2 of National Safety Month, which is set for June 8th to June 14th, engaged workers are more aware of their surroundings and more aware of best practices around safety. They're also more likely to take steps to protect their coworkers, according to Harvard University School of Public Health. There are a plethora of National Safety Council resources for Employee Engagement Week. One of those is a quick tips video on 15 safety engagement ideas. That video is available in English and Spanish. There are also exclusive resources for NSC members, including an employee engagement toolkit. And here's Barry to talk about weeks 3 and 4.
Well, Alan, week 3 focuses on roadway safety, and that will take place from June 15th to June 21st. Preventable crashes on roadways across the country continue to prevent drivers from returning home safely. They impact families, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. Preliminary analysis from NSC shows that an estimated 44,680 people died in preventable traffic crashes in 2024. Now, this crisis does vary significantly across the country. 6 states and the District of Columbia experienced increases of more than 10% in motor vehicle fatalities from the previous year, while 10 states saw decreases of 10% or more. But no matter where you live, risky driving behaviors such as distracted driving, speeding, and impaired driving play a factor in the loss of lives. To ensure that we all drive safer, NSC has dozens of resources available. They include an online quiz, videos, articles, and fact sheets. The Council also offers driver safety training courses to empower everyone to drive safely, along with fleet essentials training for people who drive for work. And we know that workplaces play a significant role in our lives, and work impacts both our physical and our mental well-being, which is the focus of week 4 of National Safety Month, from June 22nd to June 30th. Well-being on the job encompasses multiple aspects. According to the National Occupational Research Agenda, it involves positive physical, social, mental, and economic health. Why are all of those things important at work? According to the Surgeon General's office, 76% of workers in the U.S. report at least one symptom of a mental health condition, and 84% of workers in a 2021 survey said their workplace conditions had contributed to at least one mental health challenge. Among the resources available from NSC for week 4 are toolkits, safety talks, checklists, and more that cover managing stress, mental health, psychological safety, fatigue, opioid overdose prevention, and much, much more. For all 4 weeks of National Safety Month, resources are available for members and non-members, and you can find those at nsc.org/NSM. The Safety and Health editorial team has been busy this month preparing plenty of occupational safety news, and to make sure you're aware of some important stories, we present the In Case You Missed It segment. I'll get started here. Alan, as we well know, we've seen a lot of changes to the Department of Labor and NIOSH and perhaps coming to OSHA soon in Washington. Some of those changes had filtered down to the state level, and some states are reacting. A recent story that I wrote about was lawmakers in Illinois have sponsored a bill called the Workplace Extreme Temperature Safety Act, and that would codify a rule requiring employers to develop a temperature-related injury and illness prevention plan. Now, this applies to workers in both hot environments and cold environments. If that bill is signed into law, It would require employers to take protective measures when the heat index is 80 degrees Fahrenheit or higher for outdoor workplaces and 85 degrees or higher for indoor workplaces. Now, additional safety measures would be implemented both at indoor and outdoor workplaces when the heat index reaches or surpasses 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, on the other end of the thermometer, employers would have to implement protective measures when the wind chill is 40 degrees or colder at outdoor workplaces. Now, for indoor workplaces, job sites with heavy work would have a 60 degree Fahrenheit temperature threshold, while light work sites would have a 65 degree Fahrenheit threshold. So some interesting news there. Alan, I'm going to throw it to you to talk a little bit about something going on in Washington.
You mentioned kind of changes at the federal government level. That includes about an 80% staffing cut to the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, also known as NIOSH, part of a restructuring within the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, in response to that, a group of 460 organizations, including the National Safety Council, have sent a letter under their coalition name, Friends of NIOSH, trying to kind of reverse those cuts, get funding for NIOSH, and kind of reverse that restructuring plan. The letter states, cuts are devastating not only to NIOSH employees who carry out a vital mission every day, preventing workplace injury, illness, and death, but also to millions of American workers whose lives and livelihoods are protected by OSHA efforts. NIOSH protects the nation's 164 million workers and provides the only dedicated federal investment for research needed to prevent injuries and illnesses that cost the U.S. economy $250 billion annually. Also, Representative Bobby Scott from Virginia, who is a ranking member of the House Education and Workforce Committee, sent a letter as well expressing his disappointment with the proposed NIOSH cuts and kind of seeking answers. And he's also asked the committee chairs, Tim Walberg from Michigan, to hold a hearing on this HHS restructuring.
Well, Alan, we know you'll stay on top of this issue for us. This is a developing story, obviously, as with many things in Washington, D.C. at this time. So thank you for that, Alan. We appreciate it. Now, is there something that you want to make sure that we didn't miss this month? If so, please email us at safehealth@nsc.org. Thank you for joining us for this month's episode of On the Safe Side. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending some of it with us wherever you choose to listen. Please visit our website, safetyandhealthmagazine.com/podcasts, to check out any of our past episodes. That includes episode number 42 from August of 2023, which featured an interview about wearable technologies in the workplace and explored our feature story on math for safety pros. You don't want to miss those two. A special thank you goes out to this month's sponsor, Babbel for Business. And don't forget, we're quickly approaching June, which is National Safety Month. You can find plenty of resources and information about this annual observance at nsc.org/NSM. Visit the website and choose a day or week to showcase your safety pride with our Go Green for Safety campaign. Encourage your team to wear green, the universal color of safety, and pose with our printable #GoGreenForSafety sign. Capture photos and videos to share in your communications and on social media. And don't forget to tag the National Safety Council and Safety and Health Magazine. The original music for this podcast was composed by Steve Maslin. We appreciate you, Steve. A big thank you to all of our NSC colleagues behind the scenes who make this podcast go. We'll be back next month to have more safety-related discussions, talk to trusted voices from around the profession, and hopefully make you smile a little. In the meantime, please stay on the safe side.